training to be a medium, that was a big factor that was presented. Is like, you raise up that frequency, raise that vibration, because it's our understanding that people in the spirit world are operating at a fairly high frequency, very high. And we on the earth plane are in this dense physical world where we're not picking up on these higher frequencies. Some people can, some people do, some people are natural at it. But those people like myself, who maybe have a little bit of intuitive insight, are having to work at tuning in and trying to raise our own vibrations so we can tap into the frequency of spirit. So, in a sense, I've got to build up my power. We have a segment called Sitting in the Power, where you're trying to build up your own vibration, your own frequency, so that I can meet spirit at some level and hear from them and connect with them. And they hear from me, they can hear me talking, they can hear the sitter talking, but for me to tune in and get their messages, it takes a little bit of work. So yeah, you do need to kind of raise that vibration. There's several techniques to do it. My favorite, though, as I mentioned, is the sitting in the power technique, which really helps me build up my own abilities. It's not meeting spirit doing that technique, it's me building up my vibration and asking at some point, okay, I think I'm at a point where, hey, I can talk to you guys. Come on in.
Welcome to Soul Explorers with your hosts, Gary Langley and Sally Taylor. Welcome to Soul Explorers. We're your host, Sally Taylor. My name is Gary Langley, and today we have Diane Calderon with us. Diane is a certified medium, a Reiki master, a spiritual advisor, and an author. Her book is called Living and Loving Life All Day, Every Day. Diane, welcome to the show.
Thank you, thank you, thank you so much for inviting me to be a guest on your wonderful podcast. I really appreciate the opportunity to share my story, and if anyone can relate to what I'm explaining here, great. It's always nice to be hopeful, helpful, and healing to anyone who needs to hear a story such as mine. So thank you very much, Sally. Thank you, Gary.
Oh, thank you, Diane. We're so pleased that you're here. And I'm so pleased that you are willing to share your story, because it is that validation for other people that help them to recognize what their own capabilities might be with regard to communicating with their loved ones. So that said, uh, obviously you are a working medium now, but I assume you probably haven't always been a medium, at least that you were aware of. So how did that come to pass? Tell us a little bit of your background so that we understand how you got to the work you're currently doing.
Okay. As far as being a working medium, not so much, but I am trying to get into it again. It's been a little bit of a struggle for me because my life has been so busy in the last few years. I haven't been able to dedicate myself to really being that medium. Now, how did I become a medium? It's an interesting tale because unlike some people, I was not born, hearing or seeing spirits. I didn't have imaginary friends who ended up being, you know, my buddies or spirit guides or whatever. As I got older, I didn't see lights. There's just a lot that I didn't have. Although through most of my life, I did have a little bit of an intuitive ability. I could kind of pick up on people's attitudes and respond to them, or answer questions. If somebody asked me, something would kind of flow in and I could say, well, I sort of think. So I had a little bit of that. But as far as being a medium, I didn't see that in my future at all. What happened to me about 10 years, 10 and a half years ago, I was going through some interesting situations with my family life. My husband had dementia and he was declining rapidly. And I have one son who was an adult at the time who would help me out. And my son ended up in a very tragic situation. He got hit by a car one night and left this place. When he left, I found out, took a took a day to figure it out. He had left a sign with me that he was fine, that he was in the spirit world. When I realized a day later that the lights I had seen one evening were his energy, it led me on a quest to find out about the afterlife and how do people who have transferred beyond the veil reach out to the rest of us sitting here in grief and worry and wondering how they're doing. My son continued sending me messages and signs over the years, and I delved into what is it? Why is he reaching out? How is he reaching out? Oh, what is this? There's mediums out there? I guess I've heard of them. I just never paid attention to that world. Well, what do they do? So I read a lot about mediums. I eventually was led to have a mediumship reading several months after my son's passing, and the reading was eye-opening for me, and it answered a lot of questions because a big one was, how was he in this position where a car hit him as he was walking across the street? He's not blind. He's not crazy. He wasn't, tripping out on something. He was just taking the dog to the dog park and just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Or was it? As time has moved forward, I found out that he basically was in the right place. He was told by angels it was time to go to the other side. And so he did. How do I know this? It's because mediums were able to connect with him and give me that message. It was a message that helped me move forward in my grief and in my journey. I am not over the grief completely. It still hits from time to time, but I do have a better understanding as to why he was in the circumstances he was in. Now, I read about mediums. I had a couple of medium readings. They were really mind blowing and incredible. And I had a background as being a research statistician for the state of Arizona. And I wanted to do some research on this. Well, what is mediumship and how does this work? I want to know the mechanics of it. What's this about? How do they get this information? Delved in, started taking some classes, read more and more books, whatever I could get my hands on, would watch whatever I could grab on, certain programs on television that might talk a little bit about connecting with spirit. Eventually, my son in spirit led me to work for a medium. I will say it's Suzanne Wilson, the Carefree Medium. Stumbled into that kind of work part time for a medium. It was pretty exciting. So I start working for Suzanne, and Suzanne, in the course of her work, often would give classes on intuition development, psychic skills, and eventually classes on mediumship. Her classes were pretty intensive. They were smaller classes. You interacted online, you attended, several weeks in a row. You met other people that were doing what you were doing, and you got to practice what you were learning. Through all of that practice, I ended up in her certification program for mediumship, which was pretty intensive. Followed all the guidelines she had provided, and in time, I passed the class. She certified me as a medium, so I was pretty excited about it because in that whole process, I not only learned how mediumship works, I connected with spirit people and I knew what it felt like to have them come in and give me messages and give me symbols and signs and stories and feelings and just so much more that is just a wonderful thing to share with the person that is your sitter, the person that's getting this reading. So it's incredible to not only have experienced mediumship through the eyes of a sitter and get healing messages, but then to learn the techniques to make those contacts, which were important for me since I wasn't born a medium. Okay. I had to work at it and I had to practice. And in doing so, I've been able to feel, see, hear from spirit in a mediumship reading for a sitter. I can't say it's 100%. Even the best mediums will tell you they can do pretty well about 70% of the time. I think I'm way below that often, but once in a while I do have a reading that works out pretty well. So that's kind of how I got here. And like I said, I'm not really practicing it right now, but I have kind of jumped in. I've started just baby steps, getting back into doing readings. I stumbled a little bit, but I think if I practice, I will get better at it. And perhaps, who knows, I may be a professional medium and have a website and people will be looking for me. I don't know.
So, and I think, people often say, well, how do I develop mediumship? And just one thing to keep in mind, there are several different pathways to do that. I mean, different teachers teach different methods, but it's like tuning one of the old time radio dials. You just switch that frequency, and the more you do that, the easier it becomes
Mhm.
to switch into. Would you say that's in fact true?
I would definitely say that's true. In the early development of my, training to be a medium, that was a big factor that was presented. Is like you raise up that frequency, raise that vibration, because it's our understanding that people in the spirit world are operating at a fairly high frequency, very high. And we on the earth plane are in this dense physical world where we're not picking up on these higher frequencies. Some people can, some people do, some people are natural at it. But those people like myself who maybe have a little bit of intuitive insight are having to work at tuning in and trying to raise our own vibrations so we can tap into the frequency of spirit. So, in a sense, I've got to build up my power. We have a segment called Sitting in the Power, where you're trying to build up your own vibration, your own frequency, so that I can meet spirit at some level and hear from them and connect with them. And they hear from me, they can hear me talking, they can hear the sitter talking, but for me to tune in and get their messages, it takes a little bit of work. So yeah, you do need to kind of raise that vibration. There's several techniques to do it. My favorite, though, as I mentioned, is the sitting in the power technique, which really helps me build up my own abilities. It's not meeting spirit doing that technique. It's me building up my vibration and asking at some point, okay, I think I'm at a point where, hey, I can talk to you guys. Come on in.
I always chuckle when spirit says to us, meaning them on the other side, we're the dead ones.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
now you wrote this book, Living and Loving Life All Day, Every Day. And I love the title of the book because would you say, and this is a lot of the journey that you went through in the loss or the transition, I should say, because you don't lose them, of your son, and also the transition of your husband, um, and that process you went through. Would you say that having gone through all that, because sometimes I think our biggest trials bring us the biggest growth. Would you say having gone through all that brought you to that place of living and loving life all day, every day?
definitely. And I will say that there were a lot of moments from there to here that I did question whether life was worth living and what am I doing here and how can it get any harder or more challenging. And sometimes in the early days, if I think that, it would get more challenging and harder. But what I've learned over this period of time of going through the tragedies and the losses and the ups and downs of life, that in the long run, without challenge in our lives, without some of the stressors that may come in and impact us and bring us down to those levels where we think we can't go on, without that, there's no opportunity for growth or for learning. We are souls, we are light beings who have chosen to come in and live these human lives. And in doing so, we're accepting that there will be hardships and there will be challenges. I think it's rare that any human comes on this planet and doesn't have something going on in their lives, if not once, maybe hundreds of times, that makes them wonder, why am I here? I don't want to be here. This is too hard. Yeah, there's a few people who seem to breeze through life okay, but even they may have challenges that we're just not seeing and unaware of. So we come in, we have these challenges, and whatever we can do to keep our wits about ourselves and keep moving forward and find some of those tools that will get us out of those holes or out of that misery or out of feeling lost. We get these tools, we develop, we grow, and when we pass over, we have gone to a place that we weren't in when we first came here. We have achieved some accomplishment. Some maybe have achieved more than others, but that doesn't matter. It's not important how much you learn in a life. It's that you did make some progress, and you share that with your soul buddies. You talk about it. They give you a party when you get over, like, wow, you had a hard time, but look what you did. It's just incredible. And I do believe that we come back. We'll sit up there in that spirit world and we go, this is a great life, but gee, I really need another challenge. Maybe I should come back to Earth. And then you develop some kind of a plan. It's not written in stone, but some idea that I want to come back on this Earth and I want to face some other challenges. And let's see how I do this time. And so we come in and out, in and out. And each time we leave, we're a little better off than when we first came in. And maybe at some point we've learned everything. I don't know. It could take eons. Who knows? But we'll find out as we're going through these ins and outs of our lives.
What were, if it doesn't give away too much of your book, what were some of your early experiences, either from your son or your husband, where they communicated with you in a way that you went, oh my gosh, that was, my son, or that was my spouse? Do you have any short stories you could share with us about how they have communicated with you during
Yeah,
this
I
time
could
frame?
Yeah, I could give you a little bit of some of the stories as I recall them. My son, of course, was the first one to pass over, and then my husband died 2 years later. So my son got really good at the signs. I mean, the initial sign was him showing these colorful lights in front of me one night, and they sparkled and disappeared, and then they showed up in front of my husband, who was watching television. He didn't notice them, and then they disappear, and I thought, okay, I'm losing it. Great. And then they sparkled in front of me again, and then they drew my attention to a book, which I just suddenly, like, oh my God, I remember reading this a long time ago. I'm going to talk to my son about it. This is so cool. That was my son's first entry into letting me know he's okay in spirit. And those signs were incredible. But there were more. The next day, I go on a drive down the road. I live in a rural area. I have to drive down to the highway to get the paper. And I get bluebirds flying alongside the car. And I thought, well, that's interesting that I'm getting bluebirds. I don't get bluebirds in my area. And here they are coming along with me on this ride. That's fascinating. And then my monkey mind goes off on my son and thoughts of him being little and singing a song about Mr. Bluebird on your shoulder. And I thought, well, that's kind of cute. And I got home, and a couple hours later, I get a phone call telling me my son had died the night before. So looking back, I knew that those bluebirds were a sign from my son. He knew that by drawing my attention to the birds, I would think about him and a happy memory from when he was young. So there's two big signs right off the bat. Another symbol that came through with Matthew, and I think a lot of people who have lost someone can relate to the symbol, is a rainbow. And the rainbow became important because as we were putting together the program for my son's passing, his friends showed up at my house and they had printed off a photograph that I had apparently posted at some point, months, years before, I don't know, on Facebook with my son that I'd taken a snapshot of. There was a rainbow behind him, and I had him hold his hands up, and I made it look like he was holding the rainbow. Well, his friends blew this up, framed it, and they put words on it saying, "Our little ray of sunshine." So that rainbow photo became like the focal point for his memorials and for the brochures and things that we passed out. And we had friends and family who then would start contacting me like, oh, I was thinking about Maddie. And we went out and there was a rainbow. I was having similar experiences off and on. If I'd go outside and I see a rainbow just off the bat, it's like, yeah, okay, that's nice. And I'll think of Matt. But I've had Matt drop into my head. He did that recently. He said, hey, mom, go outside. You're going to see a rainbow. I mean, I'm hearing this in my head, right? And I'm sitting there doing something like, really? I got to go outside? Yeah, okay. And I go outside and there's this beautiful rainbow out there. I had no idea there would be a rainbow. So I still get these little images. So yeah, rainbows are important. Sometimes it just reminds me of him, but sometimes it's a specific, he's telling me or letting me know there's a rainbow coming, and it'll pop up outside. It might pop up in a photo on Facebook. It might pop up on something on television. So these are just a few of the signs from Matthew, and there's more. He plays with the lights. He plays with the ceiling fans. He played with the ceiling fan the day that I connected with Suzanne Wilson, who was looking for a part-time employee. And my son turns the ceiling fan on her house. And she mentions, well, after I talked to somebody and they said they had someone in mind, I put my phone down and the ceiling fan kicks on. And I looked at my husband and he's looking at me and the remote's on the table and there's the fan going. And I tell her, oh, that's my son because that's what he does at my house. He plays with the ceiling fan. And she goes, okay, yeah, all right, I see him and he's standing there and he's got his hand on your shoulder. And yeah, that's him. So he still does that. He still plays with the ceiling fans. There could be a long period where nothing's happening because, hey, I don't get a lot of visitors here and I don't get a ton of phone calls. But his former girlfriend has been here a little more often in the last few weeks. And when she's come, we're doing something in the kitchen. Maybe that ceiling fan isn't working. It's like, oh, the battery died. Well, okay, Matt, turn it on. Oh, well, the battery's dead. And then a little bit later, the fan's running. Okay. Even though it's a dead battery, he managed to get that fan to run. So he shows up in numerous ways, but those are some of his go-tos, I guess. My husband, it's a little more subtle with him. He has popped in and talked to me, but usually I have to be in meditation to talk to him and ask him a specific question. And when I do, I can hear his voice in my head. And generally, it's when I have something that I'm trying to figure out and I'm just frustrated. And it's like, okay, Sal, I need some answers. And I'll meditate and I'll hear his voice. So he's really good at that. He also will send me, signs like on numbers and license plates. The other day I was heading down to Phoenix. I had a friend in the car with me. We're driving down the road and I'm telling her, oh, sometimes I'll look at a license plate and there'll be a number 44 and I'll think of Sal. Car goes by, there's a number 444. Hey, see, I told you. And she's like, oh, that's pretty cool. A little bit later, car pulls up next to us and there's the name on the license plate, Salzar. And she goes, look, Diane, look. And I said, see, I told you there's Sal. So, he draws our attention at the right time to see that sign. And I know that, we could say, oh, he brought that sign to me. No, it's that car was going to go by. It has his name. He got my attention to look that way, or my friend's attention, whatever. So those are some of the subtle ways he'll send the signs. He sent butterflies. A big sign for Sal and a little bit for Matthew is hummingbirds. Uh, the family, his kids often had said, oh, we know dad's around when we see a hummingbird. And I believe that. One day I'm working on this book that I wrote and I had pulled up some old files on the computer and I was just trying to review a few things and I came across a little video, started watching it, and it was one of those emotional ones. And there's Sal and Matt and I'm just feeling really emotional. And, I get a little bit teary-eyed and I hear a noise on my window and I look over at the window and I swear I've never ever seen this before or since. Here I am thinking of Sal and Matt. I look at the window, pretty good sized window. One side has a screen, one is just glass. On the glass side is a hummingbird tapping. And on the side with the screen is a hummingbird clinging to the screen with his arms out, his little wings out. It looks almost like a cross. And I just knew that at that moment, here I'm feeling the grief because I'd watched this video with Sal and Matt, that was them sending these birds to me to say, hey, we're here, we're here. It's okay. You're fine. You're fine. So that was a pretty incredible sign from the two of them.
That's beautiful. So what do you tell people? I think a lot of people do receive signs and they'll go, was that my loved one? I don't
Mhm,
know.
mhm.
What do you tell people who question whether or not they've received a sign?
So if you have a specific sign in mind, for instance, a lot of people say feathers are a sign, right? And you go out and you're walking in nature and you see a feather. If you look at that feather and your loved one comes to mind right away, there's a good chance that that was a sign from your loved one because you already associate that feather with that loved one. And somehow they drew your attention to that feather, just like Sal drew my attention to those license plates. You see that and it's like, oh, that's my sign for whomever. If you're out walking and you start thinking about your loved one and you go, gosh, I haven't had a feather in a long time. Sure would be nice to see one. And a few minutes later, there's a feather. That's your loved one. Now, you may run across a feather. and you'll look at it and you don't think about your loved ones. So that's probably not a sign. It's like you make that connection with that sign, either before or after that sign shows up. So like I said, I can go outside and see rainbows sometimes. Right now we get a little bit of rain in Arizona where I live, and you'll get a few rainbows in the afternoon. So I don't go outside going, okay, Matt, you send a rainbow, because there's a chance there may be one out there. But if Matthew is saying to me, hey, go out, there's a rainbow, that's a sign. If I'm sitting there thinking about him and I step out like, gosh, man, I really miss you. Oh my God, there's a rainbow. That's a sign. No, the rainbow was there, but I was pulled to go out and he's on my mind. So I'd say that, not every time you see a feather or whatever it is your symbol is for your loved one or symbols, doesn't necessarily mean that the loved one is reaching out to you. What's important is how you felt before or after you got that symbol. Okay? That's what's important, because if that relates to your loved one, you're going to feel it. You're going to feel it. You're going to know. So just accept that not every time you see a rainbow, a feather, or whatever, it's a sign from them. But if they come to mind and you're feeling good about it, it's probably a sign.
So the symbol is really a catalyst to get us to pay attention to the fact that they're communicating with us. So, and also when they do send signs and symbols, and I learned this from our dear friend Suzanne Wilson, they have to learn how to do that on the other side. They have to actually kind of take classes or whatever of how to get your attention with signs and symbols. And so they're learning just like we are. I think people have the misconception that once you're on the other side, you're all knowing. No, you're just like you were when you were here. You have a little more perspective, perhaps, but it doesn't make you all knowing. So you still are learning when you get to the other side. It's a different type of learning, but it's still learning. So
It's still learning. And we sometimes think, oh, when I step over to the other side, I'm going to go and I'm going to pester my husband over here who's grieving, and I'm going to let him know I'm here. You got to work on that. You've got to learn how to make that communication. It's not automatic. I had Matt, a week or two or so after he had passed, pull a really good one on me. I'm in bed trying to get some sleep. It wasn't easy because my husband was so going through the dementia. He wasn't sleeping well. I had finally dozed off. And then I hear a sharp rapping on my bedroom window, like a bang, bang, bang. And it was so loud, the dog jumps up and starts barking. Right. And I wake up and I'm like, okay, I know I heard that. And the dog is barking. A little bit later, I hear a sound like somebody's knocking on the front door. Boom, boom, boom. Dog barks. This time I get up, like, who's getting my attention? Now I live on acreage, right? I go outside. I can see down my driveway. I can see the road up to my house. There is not a soul out there. There's not a car. There's nothing out there. But there's the dog and I looking around like, well, gee, must have been mad. Now, how did he learn to do that? He didn't know it right away, but when he got over there, I think they have helpers and they're like, "Hey, let's pull a trick on your mom, Matt. We'll show you how to knock on the glass and knock on a door." And so he learned how to do that. And once he got my attention, I haven't heard it for a long time. But yeah, you get over there, you're not all knowing, you're not all powerful. You don't have all of the answers, but you learn, and you learn from the other spirit people. And there's some things you're just not going to learn right away. It takes a long time. You're never going to know the answers to everything and who is God and where does God exist, et cetera, et cetera. We're not going to get those answers right away. I guess it takes eons and eons to reach the point where we understand what all of this is about. But we sure have fun trying to get to that stage, don't we?
That's beautiful. I thought I might share real quickly. I told Gary about this one right after it happened yesterday, but I also have a son on the other side. He transitioned nearly 12 years ago. Most of our viewers will be aware of that piece of my story, but just yesterday I was sitting working on my computer, actually sending you a link for this interview, and my phone was off to the side on my desk, playing a podcast, and suddenly the podcast shrank down and my son's contact information page popped up because I've never deleted it off my phone. Boom, there it was. I wasn't touching it. I wasn't anywhere near it. And I just immediately said, "Hello, Todd." Kissed my phone and ran in to tell my husband. And then Gary after that, right?
Right,
So
right.
they can learn to do. I mean, I've never received that particular sign before. Some other amazing ones, of course, along the way, but these little things that they have the potential to do if you're just open to the possibility
Mhm.
and patient and don't have an expectation for what the sign has to be necessarily, right? They can do
Right.
incredible things.
They
So,
can, and always, stay tuned and be open. I have had moments where, well, the event where I met Gary was an event that Suzanne Wilson held in Scottsdale. I believe it was the very first night I was there. Suzanne and I were sitting out in the lobby, and there were a couple of people that we were waiting on. We were going to go over and have some dinner. And I'm sitting there, and I said something to her about my son, like, well, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Matt. Suddenly, I hear the speakers in the lobby playing a song, and I just like, "Oh my God, Suzanne, oh my God." And she goes, "What? What?" And I said, "That is the one song that I relate to Matt. I did not know about these musicians until Matt had died because I had found a book he had written, a journal, and he had written on one page this particular song." And I'm like, "Oh, I don't know these people." And I found these, artists, and I played that song, and I fell in love with the group, and I've got like several of their albums. But that one song is I Will Wait for You by Mumford and Sons. So that's playing on the speakers, as I'm sitting there saying, "Oh yeah, if it wasn't for Matt, I wouldn't be here." And that song comes on. So you just be cognizant of what's going on around you, because they'll get you with songs, they'll get you with, maybe a flash on television. I don't know how many times I'll think of Matt, and I'll be watching a program, and they'll say, "Oh, let me introduce you to," and I'd go, "Matt," and they'd say, "Matt," and it's like, "Uh-huh."
Sally and I had a similar type experience. We had these two wonderful mediums that we've had on a couple of times on the show. And they brought through notable personalities. I mean, people like an Olivia Newton-John and Robin Williams, and then Sally and I started getting little signs from them the following week. It's
Wow.
like I had the TV on, and the background song to flea and tick medicine for animals was "You're the One That I Want." That was the same day we did the interview. And then a little while later, I got an Amazon items we think you might like.
Hmm.
And one of the people that they brought through was Anthony Bourdain. And you can watch these videos. They're in our lineup of available videos under Soul Explorers. Um, and they were wall hangings with quotes from Anthony Bourdain. Now, I've never ordered anything cooking oriented from Amazon. Why would they think that would be? Even if you take into account algorithms, didn't fit. And then Sally had also something pop up with one of the people
Carl
that,
Sagan, yes,
Wow.
and with a quote that he said that was identical to the topic that he was talking about in the interview. So it was a lot of fun because there was a
this
lot of validation.
this was all the week following doing this interview with them.
Yeah,
So
just within a day or two. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
It's fascinating. Is
it
that
is.
coincidence or synchronicity? I tend to say
Right.
synchronistic
Oh,
experiences
Yes,
when
I
you
do
get
as
that.
well.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
yeah.
Oh, very good.
Sally and I also are having just a lot of experience. I'd like to get your perspective on this with the numbers 1111. I mean, we don't look for them, but I cannot look at the clock. Half the time it's 11:11 when when I look at the clock, or my phone will light up because I've gotten a notification and I look at the time and it's 11:11. This, I mean, not just once in a while, not something that's a coincidence. I mean, this is happening a lot, and it's happening a lot to both of us. It's been going on for a while now. What would be your perspective on a sign like that?
I think that numbers are a significant sign. And when you have the repetitive numbers, it does draw our attention. I have similar with the 444. I don't know how many times I'll look at the time, and it'll be 2:44 or 5:44 or 4:44. And it's like, wow, I hardly ever get 4:23 or what have you. the number 1111 is extremely important because you've got 4 prime numbers. You've got 4 ones, 11111. You can look it up on a lot of resources, angel numbers, and come up with your own feeling for it. But I do think that there is a way that spirit draws our attention to things. And if it's the numbers, if it's the 1111, that's a super great way to get your attention. Because when you see those numbers, it does make you go, oh, wow, that's really cool. I see that number again. And it makes your mind go into whatever it is you want to apply a meaning to for that number. I think it's kind of cute that you mentioned the 1111 because yesterday I had to reschedule an appointment, and I had called it in and I said, yeah, I've got to change it. I've got something I have to do on the original date. And she says, okay, well, we can do it November 11th at 1 o'clock. And I'm like, okay, 11:11 at 1. How perfect. So I've got it rescheduled for that. Later in the day, I'm in town and I felt like getting an ice cream, and I pulled up to one of the fast food places that has ice cream. And they'll take your order and then they put a little sticker on your mirror and you pull up and they'll bring you your order, and it was 111. And it's like, I had to take a picture of that because these ones are repeating for today. This is really kind of cool. So, sometimes I think spirit's just playing with us. They're having fun with us. I think the ones were important to me. But now that you're mentioning that specific number, I guess it ties all three of us together here on this number for this podcast.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And
So
I
that was
do find spirit has an incredible, I mean, they don't have any worries or concerns that we humans carry around. So their sense of humor can just be outrageously funny. And they
yeah,
love to share that with us. I mean, that's been my experience. I think Sally would probably agree with that, being mediumistic herself, that they have a wonderful sense of humor.
Well,
they do.
and getting us to laugh or to be in that general state raises your vibration so that you're easier to connect to, right? So it's a really nice circle of making you delighted. I was certainly so delighted, of course, yesterday by that sign that my son sent. I've been on cloud nine for a whole day since. So it does make a difference in how we experience things when we can acknowledge them and give them credit for the good job that they did in getting through to us.
Definitely. And, we do know when we have been involved in medium readings on either side as the medium or the sitter, that oftentimes the spirit people come in and they will be concerned if someone is still in that heavy grief and just, hanging on to every little memory and crying and crying and crying. The spirit people often say, hey, it's okay. It's okay. It's fine. Lighten up. We want to see you laugh a little bit. We want to see you enjoy life because life is short.
Mhm.
Life is short. While you're here, there's the tragedies, but there's also the joys. So move forward and have a little bit of fun. Go out there and have that ice cream cone, or go out and, meet people for a little gathering, or have friends over for dinner, whatever it is you like, and be happy because we're tickled to death when we're watching you and you're laughing and you're enjoying life, and we see things through your eyes. If you go on a trip and you're seeing something that we didn't get to experience, we can feel your emotions and see that through our eyes as if we were there with you. And I think that's really important to know that spirit is in a good mood, and we may be grumpy and we may be sad and we may be going through, some hardships, but the spirit people are pulling for us, and sometimes they will pull a little joke on us or throw us a little something to make us smile, and let's carry that forward instead of those sadder days or those tears that we sometimes bring too easily.
Which is why I love the name of your book. It's a really good reminder to
Well,
to
can I explain where that name came from in the book?
please.
I'm not
Yes.
giving too much away, but in writing the book, it was a long process. I needed to write this book, and I knew it fairly early on in the journey. It's like I've got to write this story down because what Matthew had been bringing me and leading me to was, I thought, important to share with people, to know that love never dies, that our spirit people are always around us. So I had started writing the book. I'd gone through a few versions and drafts. I had a lady who had come forward to help me with it. Again, my son had led her to me, which is another story. But I had really gotten to a point where I felt like I had the book pretty much written. the way it's going to be published. Reached out to somebody else to help me finalize this, someone who knew how to do the publications. And I said to him, I just haven't come up with a title for the book. I have written hundreds of names for titles and nothing feels right. I just can't get a title. So he said, well, it'll come. It'll come. We'll get it before we get ready to publish. Like, okay, great. He gets the first draft of the book. He contacts me after he's read it and he says, Diane, the title of the book is in your manuscript. It is? He said, yes. When I read it, it brought me to tears. I said, what is it? He said, okay, so when you're talking about this particular story goes like this. After the day that my son died, that earlier in that day, he had called me and we're having a phone conversation and he was planning on coming up to see us either that evening or the next day. But in the phone conversation, he says, Mom, I'll be up tomorrow. There's something I'm going to be doing tonight. So I'm tied up tonight. I'll be up tomorrow. Oh, by the way, I'm applying for a part-time job. Now, the part-time job was to supplement income because he was going to try to get his contractor's license and he needed something to help pay the bills. It was a part-time job at a local brewing company, and it was to be learn how to be a brewer assistant. So he's filling out the little application. He's asked, what should I put in here as my qualifications? And so I just gave a general, what a mom would do. Well, that you're a really hard worker, blah, blah, blah. So he's got this application. I know that night he went to that brewing company because I heard from people who were there that night that, oh, we saw Matt and we can't believe what happened after he left here. Oh, it's so sad, so tragic. Days after he had died, I'm going, cleaning out the house. I'm bringing papers here. I'm going through things. And in a pile of papers was this application. I'm looking at the application and I'm like, oh God, this is what he was working on that morning that he called me. He died that night. I open up the application and on the qualifications for the job, he wrote, living and loving life all day, every day. And that like floored me. It's like, who writes that as a qualification for a job? I mean, we're really talking part-time assistant brewer. It's not, rocket science here. But to say living life all day, every day, all day, every day. Wow, that's pretty cool. What a neat kid to have written that. So the guy who was helping me, his name's Joe Higgins, he had read that and he said, that's the title of your book. It's right there. And that felt perfect. So that became the title of the book. These are Matt's words.
That gave me chills.
But I would also say that having come through all of that, that's sort of your motto as well, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm trying to live that way. I can't say I'm perfect at it. I do have my down times. I do have periods where I sit here and say, oh, how much longer do I have to be here? This is just a drag. But then I'll get my, spirit back up and I'll think about what Matt had done. He left and one of the early things he had told a medium is when I left, I wanted my friends to know that life is short and to live it every day. Love life because you don't know when your end time is. And that helps perk me up. And it's like, yeah, you're right, Matt. I still have things I need to do. I still have some living to do. I don't know about the loving part. I do love people, but I do live and love life. And I do like to get out and meet people and go and do things and go places and just to have different experiences. And I have a whole different aspect and attitude today than I think I would have if Matthew had died and I hadn't gotten any signs. I hadn't made those connections. Or maybe I got the signs and never thought them through, I could have seen those lights and then just forgot about it. And then as I pass over and I meet him on the other side, he says, geez, Mom, I sent you lights. Why didn't you know what that was? And, you just were grumpy the rest of your life. Fortunately, I recognized the signs and I didn't go into a life where I really didn't know where I was going. With my husband dying, and I'm not that old, I was in my 60s when Matt died. I didn't know where I was heading after Sal would be gone. I really had no clue. When I was younger, I thought, well, if I lose Sal, maybe I'll go back to school, get a doctorate degree. I don't know what I'm going to do. I really don't. Matt's death and then Sal's death and the signs and the connections that I made because of them led me into a whole new journey where I can live and love life all day, every day, although maybe it's not all day, every day, but for the most part, I'm just moving forward to places I never anticipated going and doing things I never thought I would do, and I'm enjoying it. So
Yeah.
until it's my time to go over, I think I've got a pretty good hold on where I'm heading, and I'm going to
Well,
keep
and
moving
you
forward.
mentioned something briefly about sort of a sense of there being a planning stage for each life. So, do you
Hmm.
sense that you did plan these experiences specifically so you could open to a higher reality as a result, or how do you view that?
In my opinion, and I don't know the answers. I don't know. So this is just my opinion formed by my experiences and connections and things I've read and learned. But in my humble opinion, as they say, I believe that we do have a life planning stage before we come on this earth. And that as we're going through this planning, it's like I explained this to Matthew the last time he was here before he had died, that I saw that there would be a map that you would be looking at. And as you're looking at it, you see your entry point to a life. And on the other side of that map is the exit point. Now you've got to go from point A to point B or Z or whatever you want to call it. You're going from here to there. Now, how do you get there? Well, if you look at any map, especially of a big city, there's a lot of routes to get from here to there. So as you look at that map, how you get there depends on what decisions you make during the course of a life. Now, if I'm in a life planning stage, I may have some high hopes that I am going to learn a lot. I'm going to learn compassion. I'm going to learn how to deal with tragedy or grief, or maybe not. I mean, I have all of these potentials and possibilities laid out in front of me, and I have some ideas on what I would really like to work on. But I also have to realize that all of that depends on the choices I make in that life. So I may get to the end of that life and have learned everything I wanted to because I made certain choices that got me there. Or I may get to the other side and not have gotten very far because something distracted me. Something led me on a different path. Instead of having a hardship in a relationship, I took the easy route because these choices came to me in my life. I'm not cognizant of this. I'm not rationalizing like, oh, well, should I go out and date this guy or should I date that guy? Oh, this guy's rich. Oh, that'd be fun. I'm not analyzing how that's going to get me to the end. I'm just making the choices as I bump along in life, right? But at the end of that life, when I can look back, I can then see that, okay, I did choose some hardships and I chose the right paths to get there and to get through them. That's great. I could have taken an easier path. But what would happen? I may then want to come back in another life and say, I really didn't learn this object lesson in that previous life, or maybe other previous lives. I still need to work on that. So I would really like to see if I could come in and try that this time. And maybe in that next life, I'll learn it, and maybe not. Who knows? Who knows how many times I have had to come here to go through what I've gone through in this life and get a little bit better footing when I left this place. So I don't believe that there's a soul contract that definitely says, oh, I will have a son, it'll be my only kid, he's going to get, killed tragically, and these other things are going to happen. But I did have a sense that I was going to come in and that there was that possibility that I would lose him.
Mhm.
And if that did occur, then even with that, I could either go into, deep, heavy grief and just suffer the rest of my life, or I could find a way to move out of it and maybe eventually help other people. Who knows? I'll know when I get there by the decisions I make. Apparently, I've made some decent decisions having reached that. But it doesn't mean I don't have times where I go, gosh, what if, things had worked differently? What if Matt hadn't been hit? What if he had married and had kids and then I'd be watching grandkids or something? Life could have gone different ways based on the choices one made. So, yeah, we put some things in our path, hoping that maybe we'll stumble into it and we'll learn from it. Or maybe we reach those points and then we say, I'm just not ready for that. I'm not ready to transit over to the other side right now. I have an exit point, but I don't want to take it yet. I have other things I want to do. Okay, we're not going to take you now. Let's go off on this other tangent. So it's not set in stone. It's just a fluid, ever-changing life that we live. And our choices get us from point A to point, whatever that end point is.
I like to think of it as a life outline, not so much a life plan, because that takes free will out of it if it's all planned out. And
Mhm.
as one of our channeled guests said, really the human doesn't have free will, the soul has free will, which I thought was an interesting perspective.
Yeah.
So Diane, what would you say is the most important lesson we learn here? I know what I think it is, but I wanted to hear from you what you think it is.
I think probably the most important lesson here is to learn to love. And it's more than love your neighbor, it's also to love yourself. Because many of us go through our lives and we really don't love ourselves. We maybe get distracted and, oh, gee, I'm buying the nicest jewelry or house or car because I just love myself. That's not really loving yourself. Loving yourself is just accepting who you are and working through your life with joy and with an acceptance of everyone else. And if you love yourself, you're going to love your neighbors. You're going to love your world. You're going to love your community. Doesn't mean you have to agree with everyone. Doesn't mean you have to embrace everybody. Yeah, there's some folks out there that we're not, enthralled with, but you know that they're all part of the one that you are. We're all part of this whole. And so to love yourself and then to love others, I think is the biggest lesson that we go through in a life. And it's our ultimate goal to rejoin with everybody at some future point, whatever that is, in love. And while we're here, we're learning this lesson, and then maybe we're helping others learn that lesson. And we're spreading our love by example and by our stories and by our interactions with other people. Try to just love your neighbor and envelope all that they are. And if they're kind of problem people, if they're, we do know that people out there do some things that aren't nice or aren't loving, just send them love. Just say, I'm sorry you feel that way, but from my heart to yours, I love you. Doesn't mean I accept what you're doing. I'm just sending you that love. And sometimes if you dump enough love on somebody, maybe they start to see themselves and start to love themselves. And then they begin to spread their love to others. So
It has a
just takes our
ripple
little love
effect.
light. Yep.
It has a ripple effect. I could not have answered that question more beautifully myself. And that was exactly what I was thinking. I think oftentimes people think of love only in relation to them and another person. And
Mm-hmm.
that's part of it, but this is more the agape love, the all-encompassing love. It's loving life all day, every day. And so Diane, where can people find your book if they want to read your story?
They can find the book on Amazon. Amazon.com is the go-to place apparently for books. So it is available there. If you want a little more of my backstory and information, you can go to my website, dianecalderon.com, and there's links in there to find the book on Amazon. But that's the best place to get it right now. If you don't have an Amazon access or an account, you could email me. My email is at my website, and I'll find a way to get you the book. I just would love to have people, share the story, read the story, and maybe it will touch them. And that's what it's all about. It's like, let's get the message out. Love doesn't die. Our people are over there watching over us. They can sometimes send us signs if we're cognizant and aware. And we just want some hope, some help, some healing out there for people who are going through loss and tragedy.
Beautifully
Beautifully
said.
said. We said the same thing.
Thank you.
So pleased that you were willing to join us today and to tell us your story. It really does kind of help uplift, I think, those who are going through some similar struggles. I know that it was always important to me to see when my son transitioned, to see other people who had experienced something similar, and that they do heal and that they do find, reasons to continue to exist in the world for the time that they're meant to be here. And so thank you so much for sharing that beautiful, validating story.
Yes,
Thank you
Diane,
very much.
thank you for being here today. We're really happy to have had you and get to hear your story in detail. So thanks again for joining us.
And thank you so much for the invitation. I appreciate it so much. And, I love the work that you're doing, spreading out that message that, we are souls, we're existing on this planet, and there are ways to just move forward and not get caught up in some of the strange things that are happening in our world, but to find that light and that love and to find that hope that things are better and that we do have a purpose here. And let's just keep moving forward. Let's love and live life every day, all day.
If you enjoyed this content, please hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications.